This morning we have as our speaker the well-known speaker, Jane Simmons. She and her husband, Gary, have been longtime Unity ministers and just completed a 6-year stint with Unity of Spokane in Washington and have retired to Washington upstate in their tiny house. And Jane's topic today is You Can't Sleep Through Your Awakening. Take it away, Jane.
Right. Well, thank you for inviting me today. I'm really delighted to be with you in this way, Zooming with you today. Um, as Susan mentioned, I'm living in Washington State. I'm coming to you from my she shed in Kettle Falls, Washington, which is 2 hours north of Spokane and about 30 miles south of the Canadian border. And so I'm delighted to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me. So, but let me ask before we begin, I want to ask, is there anybody here who's still asleep? Anybody? Anyone still asleep? Because this morning we're going to explore what it means to be spiritually awake. And I'm going to share my screen here. The truth seems to be can't sleep through that awakening. We just can't sleep through that awakening. This is the title of my book, by the way, if you notice it's a book cover. As the Armenian spiritual teacher Gurdjieff tells us, you can't unconsciously become conscious. So it's something to consider. We can't unconsciously become conscious. And so what is it we need to become conscious of? Well, Julia Cameron, who's the author of The Artist's Way, tells us this: we are spiritual beings with spiritual business to transact in this physical plane. And I just really love that. Spiritual beings with spiritual business to transact. And when we forget that, when we fall asleep to who we really are and why we're really here, we end up just kind of sleepwalking through life. You know, we miss it. We miss our lives. It's like skimming the surface instead of going deep, diving deep, plumbing the depths. As the poet Diane Ackerman tells us, a shallow life creates a world flat as a shadow. And spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit about the shadow today. So we're not here to sleep through it all by skimming. We're here to dive deep. Do you know that about yourself? You're here to dive deep into this life, to wake up to who you really are and be who you've come here to be, making a difference in this world. We're spiritual beings with spiritual business to transact. You know, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a story told that is comparable to the prodigal son. And in this version, the son is a prince who inadvertently strays outside of the palace walls. And he, as a young child, he gets lost and he just wanders and wanders and wanders. And years go by. Excuse me. He ends up living his life. Just give me a moment here. Something going on with my throat this morning. Years go by and he ends up living as a pauper on the street, eventually forgetting his early life as a prince. And one day the king, who's always on the lookout for his beloved missing son, happens upon him and recognizes him. And so the king joyfully rescues the prince and reveals his royal identity to him. However, the young man no longer has any memory of being a prince. He's asleep to his true self. And he has trouble imagining that life, let alone living that life. And, and it takes time for him to release all the beliefs that he has taken on in his life of poverty and really grow into the belief that he really is of royal lineage and begin to live his life that way. And so as we consider that story, can we see parallels in our own spiritual journey? You know, we learn that we are spirit expressing on this plane. Unity's second principle tells us we are all unique expressions of the divine. So we learn this, but do we live our lives that way? That's a big question for us, because that's what we're here to do. We are here to express our divine nature in its fullness. Spiritual business to transact. The New Thought author and teacher Ernest Holmes tells us that we are the ever expanding principle of conscious intelligence. So think about that. Forever expanding, never ending, eternally increasing conscious intelligence. That's what we are. And so when you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, do you ever say, "Good morning, ever expanding conscious intelligence"? Wouldn't that be a great way to start our day? Now, if I was with you in person, I would invite everyone to turn to your neighbor and say to them, "Good morning, ever expanding conscious intelligence." So you can go ahead and do that if there's someone next to you. But what I want to invite you to do is to start your day tomorrow by greeting yourself in the mirror with that morning hello to yourself, because it's good for us to know that truth for ourselves and for each other. But knowing that we are unique expressions of the divine is a lot different than living it. Knowing spiritual principle is a far cry from living spiritual principle. Do you know what I mean by this? You know, we need to put principle into practice. If we want to see any transformation in our lives, we have to do that. Unity's fifth principle tells us we need to take action and live the truth that we know. From the book Zen Judaism, which is a delightful mix of Zen and Jewish wisdom blended together, it reads this: to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to experience the complete dropping away of body and mind. Now that's the Zen part. The Jewish part says this: the difficult part is keeping body and mind off after you have dropped them. Many people gain back body, mind, and an additional 15 pounds. Now, this is said tongue in cheek, but it really points out to us that this is a moment by moment experience of returning to the awareness of who we truly are, becoming conscious of that extra baggage, that 15 pounds that we may have taken on that might be getting in the way of knowing this truth about who we are. So what keeps me dozing away? You know, to begin with, I'm not even aware I'm sleeping. I mean, I appear to be conscious here. I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm not comatose. And yet, what's really going on that I'm unaware of? If you think of things like radio waves that are traveling through our living space all the time, ultraviolet light rays that can't be seen by the human eye, dog whistles that we can't hear, there's much that happens that is undetected by the human senses. And in fact, research tells us, this is a Dr. Joe Dispenza thing, that there are 400 billion bits of information available to us right now to be accessed. 400 billion bits of information. However, our brain can only process 2,000 bits in any given second. So 400 billion, 2,000. That's a whole lot of bits that we're unaware of. And we're actually hardwired to be this way, since the brain is a sensory organ that is designed to interpret and classify our experience on this physical plane for us. And imagine if all 400 billion bits were suddenly available to us, what would that be like? As to paraphrase Emily Dickinson, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every person will be blind. So we want to be dazzled gradually, not all at once. And so we need this governing agent, a governing dynamic of some kind to help us manage life in the physical realm. And that's all well and good for us. Here's the problem. The problem, it begins when we forget that we are just experiencing a little slice of life solely through the sensory world. But instead, we think it's all there is. Do you see? This is the problem. So what else is happening that we're unaware of? Well, are you up for a scientific experiment this morning? You don't have to put on a lab coat. You don't even have to leave your seat. To do this, I invite you to look down at your foot and lightly tap it on the floor. Watch it while you do it. Now, does the visual perception of your foot touching the floor match the sensation of your foot making contact with it? In other words, can you see it and feel it happening at the same time? Okay, you can stop doing that. If so, if when you're watching your foot, you're seeing it hit the floor while you're feeling it hit the floor, congratulations, you've just done the impossible. Why? Because the speed of light is vastly faster than the synaptic conduction times that it takes to get that message from your foot to your brain. So you should see it happen before you feel it happen, and there should be a noticeable lag time. There's even a Google-worthy name for this phenomenon. It's called a delay in antidating hypothesis paradox. Go ahead and Google that when we're complete today. And there are several thought-provoking theories about why this is so, but the explanation I find most intriguing and that makes the most sense to me from what I know about brain research is that both events are happening at different times, but are experienced together. In other words, the brain is editing our experience all the time. But here's the thing, it doesn't tell us that it's doing it. That's the really important thing to remember. So there's stuff happening that we're unaware of. Our mind is editing our experience for us in order to interpret and make sense of our world, and it neglects to tell us that it's doing so. And it has selective editing. See, that's the thing we really want to get to here. It focuses on what is ours to focus on rather than trying to make sense of information. But the big let in. All filtering system at the world. Those filters arise from limiting beliefs that we took on at a young age, sometimes even pre-verbally. We take them on at a very young age, and they're under the surface. They're not conscious beliefs. They're outside of our awareness. And if I have an unconscious belief, for example, that life is unsafe, if I've taken that belief on because of my early childhood experiences in some way, that I believe life is unsafe, what will I see looking through that filter? Well, I will find all the ways that life is indeed unsafe. I'll discover all of that. I will gather evidence to support the belief that life is unsafe, and I won't even be aware that I am doing it or that I'm looking through a hidden filter. I'll just know that life's unsafe. You see, it's not something I made up. It's the truth. Here's my evidence. You can't dispute it. What if I believe there's something wrong with me, that I'm inadequate in some way, that I don't measure up? Will I discover then that, will I discover any evidence that I'm ever expanding conscious intelligence if I'm seeing through life through this belief that there's something wrong with me, that I'm flawed in some way? No, I will not. And if I took on a mistaken belief like that there's something wrong with me at a young age, I'm going to repress that belief. I'm going to keep it out of my awareness, push it away, because it'll be far too painful for me to look at directly. Instead, I might decide that really it's about someone else. Do you see? They're the problem. I will project what is too painful for me to look at within myself onto someone else. Something wrong with that guy. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Really, because this is, we all do this. We all do this. It's part of the human condition. It's part of coming here as spiritual beings with spiritual business to transact, but we're in the human condition trying to do it. It's a symptom of a newly discovered disease that I just made up called humanity sleeping disorder. You see, it's part of that. It's a symptom of that condition. Now, to be clear, this is not about blaming others or beating ourselves up for having any of this happening. Metaphysics does us no good if we use it to inflict guilt and shame upon others or to wallow in self-judgment, self-condemnation. Do you agree with me on that? Truly. No, it's about having compassion for all of us that are in this, on this journey together, for ourselves, for our family members, for those who disagree with us politically, for our teachers, our friends from childhood, the classroom bully, everyone who's been a part of our path. We're all walking around with these unconscious patterns of behavior, forgetting the amazingness that we are, suffering from humanity's sleeping disorder. And you know what? We are so courageous, all of us, to walk through our lives unaware of the magnificent beings that we are. You know what? That takes guts. It truly does. So the bottom line is that the world mirrors back to us what's really going on in our psyche. And when we have these unconscious, disowned parts of ourselves that we don't think are acceptable, it's called the shadow. We repress those parts so they're not part of our conscious awareness, and then we project them out onto the world, attributing that to be the problem. And with all this muck that gets in the way of our awareness, we lose sight of the preciousness of the divine presence that we all are in expression. Now, is there hope for us? I'm going to invite all of you to please nod your head, because the correct response is yes. So let me give you the good news. Are you ready? Lean in. Our projections can help us to awaken. We might think of them as compassionate alarm clocks, as Byron Katie calls it. Because when I make a judgment about someone else, or I have a triggering moment from someone else's words or their judgment about me, it's a pivotal wake-up moment for me, if I choose to use it as one. You know what? We can pray, we can meditate, we can read, we can go to workshops and retreats and classes to learn all this spiritual stuff. I love all of that. But where the rubber meets the road in our spiritual work is in the arena of human relationships, especially a relationship with someone who pushes our buttons. Do you know what I mean by that? Do you have someone who does that for you in your life? Our button pushers are often quite conveniently close at hand. And they're so valuable for us because they can find those places within us that are in need of the healing and the integration work with great accuracy, kind of zero right in on it. It's like finding a sore spot, on the body. And why does it hurt to get our buttons pushed? Because it goes to one of those places that we don't want to look at and see, a belief that we may have about ourselves, but are projecting onto someone else. Now, hear me clearly. I am not suggesting anyone stay in any kind of an abusive relationship. If you are in an abusive situation, you need to get help. I hope we're real clear on that. Also, if you have some really deep, seated, unresolved trauma from your past, from your childhood, I recommend getting additional support to work through that as well. What I'm talking about are, the irritations in life, the annoyances, the socks on the floor, paper cut moments in our lives. Those are surprisingly ripe with abundant opportunity for spiritual growth, for shining a light on what's going on inside of us and doing some healing work. And yet that's when we would much rather hit the snooze button and nap through it all, rather than seeing the value of having our buttons pushed. But when we choose to use these events as awakening moments, now the work becomes dealing with the inner button. Do you feel the difference in that? Do you see? This is where our power lies within us. This is where transformation can happen, is when we do the work within ourselves. Did you know that one of the ways that samurai warriors learned to do battle with each other was by hitting the pressure points on the body, pushing each other's buttons in a great big way. And there's a story told of one samurai who was soundly defeated through this method of combat. And after that, he gave it all up to spend time in the wilderness contemplating his life. 20 years later, he once again encountered his previous opponent who challenged him to another fight. And the samurai agreed. And this time, the other fighter was surprised to see that no matter how many times he hit those pressure points, there was no reaction. And the samurai explained to him that he had spent his time in contemplation working with the pressure points, changing the sore spots. They were no longer available to be triggered. And you know what? In a sense, that's the work that we do. Becoming aware of the sore spots within us that get triggered, becoming curious about what's behind that, discovering what that is, and making an internal shift to integration through the power of compassion. That is the real secret sauce to doing this work, self-compassion as well as compassion for others. And what happens then is that those spots lose their ability to send us over the edge. In fact, they actually become portals to our own awakening because we start to see it. This is not who I am. Maybe I have a limiting belief that I'm inadequate and this is pushing that button, but that's not the truth of me. The truth is, I am a spiritual being with a spiritual business to transact on this physical plane. At the center of my being, I am ever expanding conscious intelligence. Now, we don't usually do this work too willingly. I mean, nobody wants to look at their stuff, really. We can hear ourselves saying, this is negative energy. I don't want to mess with this. I didn't come to this Zoom gathering to hear about this stuff today. I'm all about being positive and affirming the truth. Well, yes, we are, especially in unity. But as we're busy affirming, it can be very easy to ignore the denial part of the equation, you see. We can affirm our good all we want, but if there's something that is sabotaging our success and we're unaware of it, will transformation happen? No, it will not. Here's the thing. We can pretend that the shadow doesn't exist and ignore it. Does it go away? No, it does not go away. If we have a goal of some kind and a conflicting belief, the belief will win hands down every single time. And the good news, though, is that these unconscious self-limiting beliefs are actually much more impactful when we're unaware of them. They cause way more havoc in our life when they're simmering away under the surface, when they haven't been brought into the light of day. You see, we will remain imprisoned in our self-imposed limitation as long as it's happening unconsciously in our lives. We stay in this prison. And here's why. Pain that is not transformed is pain transmitted. Pain that is not transformed is pain transmitted in some way. There's a Freudian saying that pain doesn't decompose when you bury it, you see? And what happens is it will be transmitted by popping out of our mouths when we least expect it at the most inopportune times. We've heard of Freudian slips. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Eventually, it's popping up somewhere completely. When we
Sorry.
We are creative beings. We are creative beings, and we are always creating, either consciously or unconsciously. Charles Fillmore said, "To be ignorant of mind and its laws is to be a child playing with fire." To be ignorant of mind and its laws is to be a child playing with fire. So awakening means becoming aware of when default patterns of behavior are creating our experience of life, and then being empowered to make a new choice and create something new. This work is empowering. It's enlivening. It's freedom to be who we've come here to be, unencumbered by the thoughts, the beliefs, the attitudes, the filters that we have accumulated over the years, becoming aware of when we are having our success sabotaged through ingrained patterns of behavior, and having the power in the moment to change that. And we do this work through the power of the heart. Because from this higher view, from this deeper dimension of who we are, consciousness overcomes all of it. We move from the tyranny of the mind to the sovereignty of the heart. We are limitless. We are divine potential. We have access to a higher dimension of creativity. From the book of John 10:34, words attributed to Jesus, is it not written in your laws, I said ye are gods. I said ye are gods. And I believe we are at a juncture in our unfolding as a culture, and the world needs us to step into this reality of who we are, to be who we've come here to be. We can choose to purposefully evolve our hearts and our minds, because we are so much more than we know. And we do not serve the world by playing small. So it's time for us to be truly free, to awaken to who we have come here to be, here to make a difference in our world, not just to sleepwalk through it all, but to realize that we have the freedom, the power, the ability in the present moment to live a heart-centered, compassionate life as conscious, aware expressions of spirit. So let me leave you with the words from one of my favorite poets, the late Mary Oliver, who said, when it's over, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was a bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made something particular of my life and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. So I invite you to remember you are a spiritual being with spiritual business to transact on this physical plane, to dive deep into the present moment and to feel the wonder and the joy of discovery that comes when we live an awakened life as, even though you're all muted, say it with me, please, ever expanding conscious intelligence. Here's to the exploration. So it is. I'm going to lead us in meditation now, and my husband Gary is going to play the music in the background. Are you there, Gary? Well, there we are. All right, so I invite all of us to just settle into your seats wherever you find yourself. And let's relax and let go of anything that is keeping us from being totally present in this moment. Any thoughts, any fears, any worries, we just gently set them aside as we begin to focus on our breath. Just watching the breath moving in and out. And with each breath, let it anchor you in this now moment. As we open up our awareness of the beauty of this moment. Imagine breathing right into your heart space. You can put your hand on your heart if that helps. Now I invite you to bring into your mind's eye someone or something that you deeply appreciate. It could be a person, a pet, a place of beauty, cherished memory. Choose someone or something that can activate a feeling of gratitude in your heart and allow that feeling to warm your heart. And with the next breath, allow that feeling to expand and radiate throughout your body. Feel every cell of your body invigorated by this healing vibration of appreciation. Feel your aliveness in this moment. And let it expand beyond your body as you create an energetic field of appreciation, harmony, peace. Every one of us is here to be the one in our lives to make the difference, to be the presence of spirit in action. We know the truth that God is our source, that deep within us, we are connected to the divine and to each other in this interrelationship of life. So we continue to breathe into the heart, feeling appreciation, letting it expand, moving outward into our world. As we become silent. God is our source, and each one of us is here to make a difference in our world. With spiritual beings, with spiritual business to transact here and now. And for this, we are grateful. And so it is. Amen.
Oh, thank you, Jane, for your thoughtful and provoking and wise and inspiring words. I think there's something here for me to take away, and I would be surprised if everybody else doesn't have something to benefit from your words. Thank you so much.